The room filled out very quickly. Hello, everyone. Hello,
hey.
hello. Yay! So nice to see. Oh my God, I'm at meeting as fast as I can.
Hello.
Hey,
hello,
hey.
everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am just going to cut to the chase because time's precious. We are today spending 45 minutes together with Rosemary. We get to pick her brain, and I'm very excited about that. So we are going to, you probably know the format, but if this is the first time attending a Behind L&D Curtain, we are inviting awesome community members and sometimes hosts, people that are not even in the community like Rosemary. I basically just chased her down on LinkedIn. I saw a post that she has done about this project, and I, out of the blue, approached her and I said, oh, hey, this is Anna Maria from L&D Shakers. We've got this thing. Would you mind showing us your project? We would really love to learn from you. She was kind enough to say yes. And so here we are today. She's going to give us a bit of a glimpse into the project, and we're going to take questions at the end, half-formed thoughts. It doesn't have to be something really small, just a reflection. We're going to take the time at the end to bounce off ideas. So Rosemary, thank you so much for saying yes to my stalking invitation on LinkedIn. I am so excited to be able to look behind your L&D curtain into this awesome project. I was just telling her right before the session that I very much admire, and I've been following a lot of AstraZeneca's projects, either in webinars, in podcasts. There are different people talking about different things they're doing. And I think that's really awesome to move things at such a big scale. So that's exciting. And Rosemary works as a global capability lead. There's a lot of conversation around building capabilities, upskilling, reskilling, and all that. For learning content and for professional skills. And she's also working to build a modern learning and development capability across the globe for the talent and development community. So let me know if I've missed something. Feel free to add something to who you are, Rosemary, and that's it. I'm passing it over to you. Take it away.
Thank you. So how could I not agree, right? And in fact, I was a bit surprised we weren't already connected when you connected with me. Right? So I've written some slides, but I actually wrote them a couple of weeks ago and I've forgotten what's in them. So I'm hoping they're going to give me a great structure. But I do remember that I put the slides together for other people who are doing our sort of work, right? So it's a presentation for L&D professionals to see, so that you get an idea of what we did, and perhaps you could take away a framework that you might use, although there's no perfect way of doing this. But yeah, so I'll see what my next slide brings me. Well, I think I will. Okay, that would be good if the slides would work.
Just
yeah,
perfect.
So I just need to hide you all so I can see my slides. There you go. So yeah, so AstraZeneca, it's a global company. It's all about the science and about patient centricity. So this is our corporate introduction slide. It's quite useful though, because it tells you we're science-led. We do the research. These are our products. Sometimes we partner with other organizations who've done research in order to get drugs out to the market. And you see this list here of the areas that that's not what I meant to do. Of the areas that we work in. So we work in cancer, cardiovascular, renal and metabolic diseases. So they're sort of chronic diseases, respiratory and immunology. And of course, recently, we have been working more on vaccines after COVID. This bit that says diversified portfolio, that means we have all sorts of treatments for very rare diseases, but also vaccines and so on, which is primary care and specialist cancer care, specialist cardiac care, and so on. Our sustainability commitment's really big. It's up there on the corporate scorecard, and we had a leadership call yesterday, and the person who speaks for sustainability on the board was one of the few speakers, and it's a very prominent theme for us, along with with patient centricity. And we are around the world. We have lots of people in China. We have people in LATAM, North America, Europe, and so on. So coming to the learning situation, previously, learning at AstraZeneca was managed in the business units. And a learning transformation program was started, and that implemented one tech stack, including a learning experience platform, which is Degreed. And that's sort of the central focus for learning transformation. And at the same time, there's a new federated model. So we haven't centralized learning, but there's a central center of excellence for talent and development. And we look after capabilities that are agreed to apply to the whole of AstraZeneca. And professional skills is one of those 5 enterprise capabilities. And I'm the global lead for professional skills, amongst other things. And so my brief was to create the first ever enterprise-wide offer for professional skills. However, everybody sort of knew what they meant by professional skills, but there was no definition. There's an implicit definition, and they didn't know which skills, there was no list of the skills that were included in professional skills. And Degreed, as our learning experience platform, was brand new. So we didn't have a model of what an online first offer would look like on Degreed. So these were the challenges going into this project. And so thinking about what we did in order to give you something that you could take away, these are the 5 steps that I think could inform any capability in any organization. I'm not saying you would need to do them all, and the order makes it look really simple, right? But you often iterate as you go. But first of all, we did need to define what professional skills were, and then we needed to build some content. Then we needed people to engage with it. This is the initial content was online pathways on Degreed. So, we need people to go into Degreed and find our content. Obviously, we need to measure the impact. And having built the formal learning content, learning pathways, we're now at the stage of trialing some informal learning resources, because, as you guys all know, most learning is through exposure and experience, and not just through the education piece. So this is our definition bit. And the context that led to this definition is the 100-year life, our working lives getting longer and longer. We're going to have portfolio careers, and at the same time, the half-life of skills is getting shorter. And so the principle is that we should develop skills that enable our people to do their jobs now, well now, but also enable them to be ready for the future of work, whether it's at AstraZeneca or somewhere else. And from that came our definition, which is these are the skills that anyone in any business area, in any organization, in any country might use during their career. And I've got one bit of screen here, but you can see the little butterfly that we use as our sort of imagery. And we chose that sort of book butterfly because it's all about potential, positive transformation, and an ability to experience the wonder of life, right? So a little bit of learning magic. So also in the definition, we had to decide what skills to include. And you can see the ones that we have so far. This isn't a fixed list, but these are the 20 skills that we cover so far in the middle. And we had 2 ways really of identifying what the skills should be. I divide them into push and pull. So for example, we knew what people were looking for in the AstraZeneca instance of Degreed. So that's raw data about what learners really want, right? But we also were able to get the search data from a global content library and look at what people all around the world are looking for in content libraries. So that was another sense check, right? So we could, both of those are pool data, but one of those is internal pool data and the other is external pool data. And then we had the push data, people telling us as experts within AstraZeneca that they thought we should be covering such and such. Sometimes that was informed by pull because they might work in a business area and the leadership was asking for something. And I was also able to get the spending pattern for the previous year for all of our expenses and all of our invoices, and see where money had been spent by different business areas in the professional skills. And that was also informed. So we had lots of different ways of gathering data to inform what we did. And then there is a little bit of gut instinct goes into this as well, right? And we prioritized the ones we did if there was an urgency of demand. And sometimes we had a skill on the list and we were asked by a particular business area whether we could speed up and prioritize the content for that. So we did that. Building the formal learning content on Degreed, as I mentioned, there wasn't a pattern. And so we were able to create what we view as best practice, and we share that internally as well. And we have these 5 steps that we use to create learning pathways in Degreed. So we'll define the skill. What do we mean by resilience, say, or what do we mean by time management? And then research all of the possible models, bearing in mind that this is going to be agnostic to AstraZeneca. These are the skills that anybody in any organization, in any business area might need. So we want authoritative content that if you learned about storytelling, or if you learned about resilience, or learned about influencing, and you went to another organization, you wouldn't have learned something that was so specific you couldn't use it elsewhere. So we do the research, we work out what our models are going to be. Degreed is an aggregator of content. So we will curate some content that aligns with the story that we want to tell. Then we narrate that content. And then we go back and we shape it with the 3 E's. So we use this three E's model for learning: education, exposure, and experience. And so we don't want our pathways to just be telling people. And so we get them to reflect perhaps on their own experience, or to ask other people to get some exposure in. So it's definitely an education approach still, but we try to bring in the other aspects of exposure and experience into the pathway learning. Then we spend a lot of time streamlining, reducing the word count, taking out turns of phrase and unnecessary words. And if we pull content in, external content in, which we mostly do because of the aggregator approach, we often rewrite the title. We don't just take the title, the metadata that comes in. So we might have a talk by somebody and it has a title, but we change it to "Watch this presentation by Steve Jobs," or look in this presentation, note that he uses this structure, or something like that. So we cut down the words, and all of the words have to earn their place. And that's also helpful for us because we translate our content, and actually when you translate content, you pay per word. And before we've translated it, we're aware that people will be reading in English and it's not their first language. And at least if we have been concise and used clear sentences and so on, that's reducing the friction, enabling people to understand what we want them to understand. And at the end of our pathways, where we have something suitable, we will also add content about developing your curiosity. So sort of optional content at the end of the pathway. And this might be a piece of content. Each pathway usually takes about an hour to complete, but we might have a really great TED talk, but it's 45 minutes, or a recommendation for a book, or that's aligned to the subject news. If you want to learn more, you can go and do this. So where we have it, we add that content in. Another thing that we did, that my slides have reminded me, is that we always looked for the content that we were curating to see if it could be auto-translated. So on YouTube, on TED Talks and so on, you can often use closed captions. And so that way, even when we did write in English, we knew that the content would be available in other languages and that people could turn on the closed captions and have an easier time of consuming that content. And then in the tiles and the narration that we used in Degreed, we then translated that so that we have, we cover 14 languages, and that covers 92% of our population in their working languages. So, and there's a nice little list here at the bottom if you're interested. I mean, the only unusual one perhaps is Swedish, because AstraZeneca is an Anglo-Swedish company, so Swedish is a very important language for us. Then the next stage was engagement. And so having built the content, we also have a SharePoint site for the promotional resources. And that's where we keep collateral that isn't really learning content. So we have a video that I'm going to play you in a little minute, but we have images and backgrounds like the one behind me that people can download. There's a choice of 5 colorways, all in AstraZeneca colors. There's a guide to how to make the most of professional skills with some use cases. This is aimed at learners, and we do share that in our academy as well. And there's a summary that people in HR might use, or learning professionals might use, to share what we've got about professional skills with their leadership. And we have a blog. And every month we have a new topic for the blog that's related to one of the skills in the pathway, in the 20 pathways that we have, 25 pathways, we have 20 skills, 25 pathways. We invite guests to contribute to the blog sometimes, and we publish and then post about them in Workplace in order to drive some traffic and some interest and keep people thinking about professional skills. So this is the one-page summary that is available to our learning professionals and our HR partners, so that they can talk about it to their business leaders and so on if they need. And again, we send them back to, you can use promotional resources. And then the next thing we're doing is measuring impact. And what we're interested in is whether people change their behavior. So we're less interested in whether they're confident, because of course they could be more confident before they start and they unconsciously incompetent. And we're not so interested in knowledge if it doesn't get applied. What we really care is that people are going to do something different at work, and that changing of their work will in some way contribute to the performance of AstraZeneca and to saving more people's lives. And so we have a questionnaire at the end of each pathway that is quite difficult to gather data and to read. It's voluntary to mark completions and so on. So if you did care about consumption, you don't have absolute certainty that you're seeing all of those data. But what we care about is whether people are applying their learning. And so we ask people on a scale of from strongly disagree to strongly agree, so it's a 5-point scale, whether they're going to be able to apply the learning. And then we give them a free text box to tell us about that. And we also ask them with the same scale whether their learning, the application of the learning, will contribute to improved business performance. And again, we give them a free text box to tell us more about that. And we've now got hundreds of impact stories. We officially launched on the 10th of June with our global academy in the 14 languages. And the sort of categories that the responses fall into when we look at the text responses are about self-awareness increasing, people having those light bulb learning moments where the penny drops and they suddenly realize something. Sometimes people committing to change their behavior. We have a lovely example where somebody said that she was on a performance improvement plan and was considering whether AstraZeneca was the right place for her anymore. And she completed the resilience pathway and applied some of the tools around reframing, and things improved for her considerably as a result, and that she's now staying. So that retention story is really lovely, on 2 levels, one for her and one for the return on investment, right? And then people saying, no, I will be using this methodology at work. So this is really important for us, that we're measuring impact in a way that isn't solely about numbers. I mean, of course, you have to drive consumption in order to have the impact, but engagement and consumption are not what we really care about. They're just necessities to get us to impact. So the 5th stage that I talked about in those stages at the beginning is that we're now, having built the formal learning pathways, which are necessarily online first education piece. They're mostly about sharing a model and getting people to practice the use and understanding around a subject. We're now trying to move into learning resources that support learning through exposure and learning through experience and actually doing things yourself. And this is the early stages for us, but for example, we've built some conversation guides, which are frameworks that people can use, not leaders necessarily, just somebody who's finished a pathway and wants to share the content. We give them a little agenda that gives them guidelines that they could talk about, and perhaps some highlights that they could share from the pathway. And this isn't, they don't have to stick to it, but it gives them confidence to start a conversation with colleagues and to encourage a conversation about how they manage time or how they manage their resilience, for example. And so that's something that we're doing now, and that'll be the emphasis for us next year. And so then lastly, I'm going to sort of flip back to engagement. I didn't want to stop the flow by showing a video, but I'm going to show a video that we used at launch, part of our engagement campaign.
What will the future of work look like? However detailed the predictions, we will only know for sure when we get there. But we do know the landscape of work is changing. Our working lives are getting longer. And to thrive, we need to continuously adapt. We also know that the work of tomorrow will use many skills that we can build today. So to help you get there, we've developed Professional Skills at AZ, a choice of tightly curated pathways structured for learning, covering a variety of skills, available in multiple languages, enabling you to perform more effectively now and for whatever the future of work brings. Professional skills are transferable and durable. They can be used by anyone, in any business area, in any organization, in any country. You can use professional skills at AZ in a way that works for you. In the moment, immediately accessible when you want to improve or build a skill. After a conversation with your manager, or as part of your own personal development planning. So whatever you'll be doing in the future, you'll be ready. Follow us on Degree today. Professional Skills at AZ.
And that's me. There's around 5 steps, and I'm going to stop sharing now so that I can see you, because I've been talking to myself rather. So I could see stuff's coming up in the chat, but I didn't want to share the screen because I also knew we were recording. So there was that whole fun thing of, I can see there's 15 remarks in the chat already.
So we have a bunch of hellos in the chat, but there we go. Orsi's doing it. She's raising her hand. Now it's time for questions. Something that you're curious to find out more, something that piqued your interest, anything. We still have about 20 minutes to pique Rosemary's brain. So Orsi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria, and thanks, Rosemary, for the amazing presentation. I have a question around the concept of professional skills. Do you also have a competency framework, or how do you think your professional skills framework differs from like a standard competency framework?
Competency frameworks are not widely used at AstraZeneca.
Mm-hmm.
So no, we don't have one. And actually, one of the things about the professional skills is that they're the things that are not your job. Mm-hmm. They're the things that enable you to do your job well, right? So we have, for instance, we cover communications, but mm-hmm. we wouldn't expect necessarily a communications professional to get everything they needed from the communications, but from our storytelling pathway and our presenting skills. So in a way, these are the optional topics that people won't be getting as part of their technical competency. And we didn't, when we were looking at it, we did think about, should we have different levels? But actually, because these are the skills that are on top of your job, of course, you can be really good at some of them. You could be great at presenting or less good. But the models and the approach generally would apply to anybody, however senior and however practiced they were, if it wasn't their profession. So the storytelling pathway uses Minto pyramid principle methodology. This is something you could use if you're the CEO or if you're a new graduate. The approach is the same, and the way the model is the same, and how you would practice it is the same. So we don't have levels, and it doesn't directly relate to a competency framework. Because this is the global offer, we sometimes get people from different business areas looking to map some of our skills to what their business area priorities are, and that's about the closest we get.
All right, thank you. That makes sense.
I saw there's a question in the chat, but do you want to come off mute and make your question?
Yes, I would first give it up to Mayan because she had her hand raised, and then we move over to the ones in the chat. Mayan.
Thank you. Rosemary, I wanted to ask you about the engagement campaign specifically, because it's rarely the case that you have a campaign video and people feel so hyped and then they just go like, yeah, we're going to learn now. So what other options did you take? Yeah, I mean, and we wish, but it's not the case. So what other actions did you take? Did you use maybe ambassadors, or did you mentioned the blog, but was there anything else?
So we're still working on it, right? So we launched this global offer on the 10th of June, so not so long ago. And we were building all the time, we were building in English, and we would publish each pathway in English so that it was available as we did it, to be agile. But then we had to translate them all, which is a really massive piece of program management, build all of the translation versions, and then launch. So we haven't been live for very long. And the video was used primarily on our internal intranet, as we managed to get, because we had a launch and a video and an article, we had some global coverage. It's quite hard to secure a space in that, right? So, and then it's the drip, drip, drip. So it's the partnerships, it's responding to people who ask us for, my business leader would like us to talk about influencing, what can I use that you have, those sorts of things. We have first line managers and we want them to be better at doing this, that, and the other. What do you have? So there's the mapping piece. There's the blog. The thing about the blog is that it gets people to think a little bit about a topic, and we post it in Workplace. So we post it we have the blog on our SharePoint site. We have multiple posts about the blog. So for instance, we have a pathway that talks about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And we had our global head of D&I created a blog for us, and we posted that in HR, in the L&D professionals area, but also in the inclusion and diversity group, right? And so then that, we want them to look at that pathway that relates to something they're interested in, but in going in to look at that pathway, we want them to see all the other stuff. And so one of the things we do is not make it too easy. We don't use lots of deep links that just go to the pathway. We want them to have to click a couple of times so that they see the whole offer, and they do have to scroll a bit. So the sort of, it's almost counterintuitive. But we're trying to make sure that people see what else there is that they might be interested in, that they hadn't been looking for. We're trying to ramp up now the engagement piece, and in particular to partner with HR partners and L&D partners in our overseas markets, because we've translated the content, but the global launch, because it was a global launch, was in English. The video has closed captions in all of the 14 languages, but of course, what we need to do now is create those partnerships and get people to share and tell other people about it and recommend and so on. And that's going to be the big piece, right? Getting the value out of the investment. And I think the conversation guides in a way might help us too, because AstraZeneca is quite traditional. Degreed is new. It was only launched 2 years ago. And so the idea of online first content isn't where everybody's going. They don't think, what can I find online? They think, what workshop can we have? And we have a couple of workshops that people can facilitate, but mostly we have these conversation guides where you don't need to be an expert. And the conversation guide refers to the pathway as well. So we're partly there, we're meeting those people where they are, if they want something that's not online first, but it's, they're probably going to have a virtual call, but that's a bit of a more human hook. But yeah, ideas would be really welcome, because for sure, that's our big challenge now, the engagement piece. Right?
Speaking of the human hook, and there are a couple of questions related to experience and exposure. I do believe that once you will really focus on that experience and exposure and social learning and getting people to actually talk about it, bringing into their workspaces, into their calls, one-to-ones, into their whatever interest groups, etc., that will have a very nice ripple effect on expanding it or making it valuable enough, having people talk about that. And speaking of experience and exposure, you already mentioned that it's something that you're moving towards now, right? Anne has a question. How did you incorporate the experience and exposure into the content library? So within the content that is already there, I assume, and otherwise feel free to just unmute and let us know. Are there any prompts or something that already kind of...
Yeah, so that in the degree pathways, you can use the tiles and you can use posts and tasks to give people instructions, right? And so the very simplest of these actually isn't a professional skill, but the first pathway I ever did was really just to help people in patient centricity, because we were launching Degreed and we wanted to have something, patient centricity is absolutely foundational to AstraZeneca. And they had an e-learning course, but we got Degreed. And so I wanted to create them a pathway that included the e-learning, but was more suitable for the new learning platform. And the very first thing that I said in that pathway was, think about a time when you or somebody you cared about was unwell, and how did you feel, right? And it's like one of the best bits of learning content I've written, I think, because that reflection and making you think about that goes to your experience, right? And as we know, if you feel a bit emotional, if you get people to either have that penny drop moment where they think, oh, I'm such an idiot, I didn't realize that, or, oh no, that was, I do remember how I feel and I was stressed and needy. We wanted to get people to be thinking about the patient's shoes, right? And so you can do it in those very simple ways. And sometimes we'll say in one of the tiles, we say, what do you think the benefits are to the organization of people being resilient? And people then respond. So you get a little bit of social learning because you can see their comments, and we were quite pleased because we thought they might just reflect on it, but not share, but they do in fact share. And so that's, there's a real pleasure when you see people interacting with your content. So we do things like that. We sometimes will have a red thread. So for example, for the storytelling pathway, I talk about the methodology. That's one that I wrote myself. And I say to people at the beginning, we know that people learn things by doing, right? So think of an example where you have to tell a story at work and apply this framework to that story. And now think about this, and now go back to your story and do this. So sometimes you create a worked example. So lots of different ways, and again, that's something that we'd welcome ideas, right? Oh, I see somebody else.
Yeah, there's so many questions in the chat. There's so many questions in the chat, and really, really good questions. And I'm going to link one from Gabriela here, and maybe you haven't yet, conceptualized it that far, because I get the project is quite fresh. Do you have any guidance on the experience and exposure part? I see a lot of people struggling to find opportunities to really practice and learn in different ways other than reading and taking courses or attending a workshop or whatever, right? So we're going back to this how do I bring it into my daily life? How do I talk about it? How do I actually see that I'm improving, and not just myself, but my colleagues also, and my manager? And it's made very much real. Anything to share there? Otherwise, maybe we can take this in the community as a good
I'd welcome input.
brainstorming post.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we're doing, but we are basically piloting them, we're just trying.
Yeah.
So one of the things is these conversation guides, and then it's a piece on the engagement side as well, really, that about this time of year, a lot of areas of the business have development weeks or development days, and it's not something that I would do, because I think that the whole point about learning is you do it all the time as you work, right? So I probably wouldn't run a campaign that focused on having a week about learning, but we do have them, and it's a useful focus because it gets people to think about it. And so what we have done there is we've created a resource guide that, if you're going to do one of these events, here's some resources from Professional Skills that you can use. And if you have an hour session, you could share, we have a video about the 3 E's and how people learn in the different ways that some colleagues created about a little while ago, maybe a year ago, which is a great video, 3 minutes or so. And then you could run a conversation guide, which is about learning through exposure. And we also have a Professional Skills video, we share that. And so we sort of curate and show some examples of what an event might look like if it was 1 hour, if it was 2 hours, and how we have resources to do that. So we're promoting the conversation guide, which is more about exposure, and moving away from providing a workshop, for example. So that's, when we ask for one thing, we give them another, or we proactively go out. It's hard, right? And what some of the other things that are going on in the organization are a change. We moved away from performance management to performance development, and with that we have colleagues working really hard at implementing a coaching and feed forward culture. And so there's an encouragement about conversations, and there's going to be a campaign run about great conversation campaign running to encourage conversations. And so I'm linking with the people, my colleagues who are doing that, because of course we can say, if you can have the personal conversation, but if you want to talk about learning, here's some other resources, there's a relationship here. The experience thing, that's hard, right? Because we have a cadence of things like, this time of year we have quarterly check-ins, and I've just received my reminder that it's about time to book my Q3 check-in with my direct reports. And so there is telling people, oh, if you're going to do that and you want to map their development, here's some resources. So yeah, but we'd love to know those ways. One of the other things we're going to do a pilot with is working with Nomadic, which is an online platform, and they have semi-synchronous cohorts. So it's virtual, but you must interact in order to progress through and get points. And so we're going we use them already in our HR Academy for the Agile Learning Organization side. And so we're going to do a pilot with them, because that's very scalable. My audience is more than 80,000 people. So it can't be something that I have to deliver myself directly. But yeah, if you have those ideas, we'd love those ideas.
Yeah, we can definitely open it up for just a quick brainstorm kind of post in the community. Speaking of community, my community brain immediately goes to, when I think about exposure and experience, it immediately goes to communities of practice, groups that are actually meeting to discuss about that. So I immediately think of, presentation skills. Why don't we have an internal Toastmaster groups where people can actually go there and apply what they're learning and get feedback and so on? So that's where my mind goes.
And actually, we have a link in the pathway. That's exactly, we do have an internal Toastmaster group already, and so in the presentation skills pathway, we have a link to that. Right, so that's exactly where you might get. I'd forgotten about that, but yeah, that's an experience piece.
Yeah. Brilliant. Let's go through some of the other questions. How do you deal with employees not finding the time for learning? Is this part of their performance management process? Also, do you follow any similar approach to develop technical skills?
So I'm not working on technical skills. And the technical skills primarily are dealt with by the business areas where they are most relevant. Right? The no time for learning thing, the big way to get to that, right, is to talk about the fact that we learn through experience and exposure, isn't it? I mean, that's my feeling, is that, I mean, there are a couple of things. I did talk about us now having a single learning tech stack. And part of that is an adaptive learning platform, so that people are only getting the learning content that they need, because they do a test at the beginning and it assesses where they're at, and then it judges what it recommends the right content to them. So there is that way of reducing formal learning to the stuff that you actually need, and that's done by the adaptive platform. And I don't know very much about it. But for me, the big thing is to help people understand that they do have time for learning, because they're working, and by working they can be learning, right?
Yes.
And they have colleagues. Yeah, they have colleagues and they're learning from them. But obviously you have to have resources to promote those messages, and we're a pretty small and tight team, and so it's reaching the intermediaries, the HR partners and the L&D partners and so on, and getting them to multiply the message for us.
Speaking of, we're a small and mighty team, there's Eva's asking, how are you staffed to develop this amount of people that work developing this, and how much time did it take?
So I have one direct report, and I also look after learning content strategy and L&D capability. And I started in this role at the beginning of 2020, and I didn't have the direct report then. So it's difficult, right? But I also have a part-time person who's a temporary resource who's really experienced, so that's great. And for example, I didn't make, we used partners to develop the video, right? So we don't do everything ourselves. The imagery and the video we contract out, but we tried using external people to help us write the pathway content, and it didn't really work very well for us. We had thought these are transferable skills, and after all, that we're not the deep experts on project management or change management. Other people could write these pathways. There's lots of instructional designers out there, but we have a really specific standard of the way we want it done, with very concise language. We want it to be English language. We want it to be, not so we use English, not British English. We use not American English. We want these short sentences. We want every word to earn its place. And we found, and we want the narrative to appear in the pathway. We don't just want to just have a collection of links. We don't think the content speaks for itself that well if you just curate it, like watch this video, read this book, that's probably not going to do it. You have to explain to people what the point of the sharing this particular video is, or ask them to reflect on it and so on. So there are 2.5 of us really, and it's taken us probably about 18 months of concerted effort, but we do some other things as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm looking at Antoinette because she had a question that was quite similar to this. Like, did you develop all the pathways yourselves? Did you curate mostly? And how did you integrate that? And I just want to make sure, did Rosemary just answer that question for you, Antoinette, or is there anything else that we should cover?
Oh, good. Thank you.
And how many courses do we have on a platform now, Rosemary?
So we have 25 of these pathways covering 20 skills. And we don't rule out that somebody might find a skill we didn't cover. So the reason we have 25 pathways is for project management and for change management, we have more than one pathway. Because we want each pathway to be manageable, and we broke. So we had preparing for change and being aware of how people are affected by change, and then one about managing change and so on. So it could be that another topic comes up and we augment that, but that's where we're at the moment. And of course, on the platform, there are many other, each technical area has an academy, and there's leadership courses and so on. I mean, our content is not around leadership or manager roles. It's for anybody, whether they are a manager or they're not a manager. So that, you know, the coaching content has its own educational content, and so does the leadership development, and the learning agility and digital data is outside our remit as well.
Thank you so much. I had a bunch of questions myself. We're at time, so we really want to be respectful of everyone's time, and especially of your time. Thank you so much. There's a lot of praise, a lot of thank you in the chat for you, Rosemary. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. Where can people stalk you like I did if they want to continue this conversation, if they want to pick your brain? Where do we find
you? Can stalk me on LinkedIn, but sometimes I get quite a lot of I mean, I always accept the connection, right? But sometimes I don't answer the messages because there's just so many. And the other thing is I get a lot from vendors who are trying to sell me things. So, you know, then I get the, thank you for connecting. Would you like to buy this? Would you like to buy it again? And after a while with them, I disconnect. But, you know, it's hard to find the messages in there. But also, if you find that there's a few questions, I can always send you some written answers, right?
Yeah. I mean, you are in the Shakers community.
Yes.
So in the Shakers, it's a container where we don't sell stuff. We are passionate about learning, learn from each other. We generously share. So feel free to find Rosemary in the community as well. If you have geared questions, we didn't have the time for all of the questions in the chat. Feel free to take that in individual messages. And also I popped her LinkedIn link for you guys. Thank you so very much. I'm left with a lot of ideas, a lot of questions still.
Well, as I say, if the question, it might be worth sending over, you know, because a lot of the questions will have common threads, right?
Yeah.
I could give you some written answers for 3 or 4, if there's 3 or 4 more themes that we haven't had time to look at.
That would be awesome. And maybe in a couple of months from now, a year from now, you're coming back and you're sharing your progress and how everything has landed, because it's quite fresh. So it needs time to marinate and for you to see the impact. I'm mainly interested in this. What is the impact? How does it land? Do we see any type of change in any type of business KPIs, whatever those are, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd be happy to welcome you once more.
And by then I'll have lots of ideas from you guys that I'll have implemented. So
there we go.
We can put to that too.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining. Wish you all a beautiful rest of the day and see you very, very, very soon. Take care.